ahead and turn to Jeremiah chapter 9. Jeremiah chapter 9. And we're still in the third sermon. It doesn't end till chapter 10. The beginning of chapter, I believe the beginning of chapter 10, if I remember right. It's more continuing on with the rest of the sermon, and just more of God's grief with Israel and Judah, or I should say Israel as a nation, not the two separate kingdoms. But he does mention, he talks of Israel in this chapter. He also talks of Judah. So you have to be very careful when you're reading through Jeremiah, because usually when he's talking about Israel, not always, but usually it's the nation of Israel as a whole. But there are times that he talks about Israel, the northern kingdom. And so you have to, and one of the things you have to remember in Jeremiah is when he talks about the northern kingdom of Israel, it's reflecting back, because they've already been taken into captivity. And so it's the Lord telling Jeremiah, look at what happened to Israel. This is what's going to happen to Judah, type of thing. So let's begin reading, and we'll talk a little bit as we go along. Oh, that my head were waters, and mine eyes a fountain of tears, that I might weep day and night for the slain of the daughter of my people. Oh, that I had in the wilderness a lodging place of wayfaring men, that I might leave my people and go from them, for they be all adulterers and an assembly of treacherous men. And they bend their tongues like their bows for lies, but they are not valiant for the truth upon the earth. They're not valiant for the truth upon the earth, for they proceed from evil to evil, and they know not me, saith the Lord. Now, when you first start reading these, with verse 1, and I had the same thought when I first started reading it, and even as many times as I've read this in the past, is this Jeremiah? But it's not, because in verse 3 he says, saith the Lord. This is the Lord. He's grieving, weeping, he says. He says, I might weep day and night for the slain of the daughter of my people. There's going to be a lot of people lose their lives because of what they've done. And remember, the temple is there in Jerusalem, and that's specifically where he's speaking of in this sermon, is Jerusalem, Judah and Jerusalem, but Jerusalem mostly. The temple is where God went to meet with his people. He went there in the Holy of Holies and met with the high priest. That's where they once a year brought the offering before the Lord. In that day, that's how they met with the Lord. And so he mentions here, oh, that I had in the wilderness a lodging place of wayfaring men. It's almost like he's going back to when they were in the wilderness with the tabernacle, because it was a better time, according to the Lord. You know, at least they were there, and they were, even though they had their problems, they weren't like they are in Jeremiah's day. He names some of the things they're involved in: adultery and an assembly of treacherous men. In other words, they're liars and thieves and murderers. And all these things he's speaking of are not just, remember, if you remember back, I can't remember if it was the last chapter or the one before, he talked about some of these things in more detail. it's not just spiritual; it's also physical. They're the married men are chasing after each other's wives. They're um, uh, they're lying and cheating. They're stealing from each other. Um, they can't keep alliances with other countries because of these things, and these other countries have become angry with them. They're and of course the other countries that I'm talking about are the ones around them, their neighbors. They're already hate Israel anyway because of their God, but it's gotten even worse. Um, as we'll get to on Sunday mornings in the Sunday school lesson, we'll eventually get to that in the study on the Kings. You'll see more of that in detail there too. But it says in verse 3, and they bend their tongues like their bow for lies. They can't tell the truth. And it says, but they are not valiant for the truth upon the earth. They're not telling the truth. They're the alliances they had made with their neighbors, with each other, even they can't even stick to them. They can't abide by them. It says they proceed from evil to evil. They just keep going from one lie to the next, one evil to the next evil. And they know me not, saith the Lord. They've forgotten the Lord. Take ye heed, every one of his neighbor, and trust ye not in any brother, for every brother will utterly supplant, and every neighbor will walk with slanders. One of the things to remember when he talks about neighbor here, and I mentioned neighbor, they're neighboring, and when I said neighbors earlier, I was talking about their neighboring nations around them. But here, and even this goes back even to the law, even their neighbor, the Lord a lot of times considered their neighbor would be the person living next to them, their own people, not another country. So here he's talking about their the people that live close by. They can't even trust their next door neighbor. In other words, and he says, and they will deceive everyone his neighbor, and will not speak the truth. They have taught their tongue to speak lies, and weary themselves to commit iniquity. They've done this on purpose. See, it says they taught their tongue to speak lies. They've done this on purpose. They've purposely gone this way. Thine habitation is in the midst of deceit. Through deceit they refuse to know me, saith the Lord. The Lord's own house, his habitation, is in the midst of all this, he says. Therefore thus saith the Lord of hosts, behold, I will melt them and try them, for how shall I do for the daughter of my people? He's going to try them, melt them and try them. Remember, he tries us by fire many times. He compares his trying to that of the melting of gold or silver and to get the impurities out of it. And so that's what he's talking about here. And he's going to try these people. They're going to suffer, and he's going to purge the evil out of them. Their tongue is as an arrow shot out. It speaketh deceit. One speaketh peaceably to his neighbor with his mouth, but in heart he layeth his wait. They speak with a double tongue, in other words. Or two-faced is another term we would know. They speak kind to their neighbor, but deep down they're waiting to do something evil to their neighbor. Shall I not visit them for these things, saith the Lord? Shall not my soul be avenged on such a nation as this? The Lord's questioning Jeremiah here. Should I even bother with these people? Remember, the Lord is the one who called them out of the rest of the world, of the rest of the nations. He called them out as a chosen people, and now look at them; they've forgotten Him. And now He's asking Jeremiah, why would I go visit them? Why would I go to the temple? They've forgotten Him, so what's the purpose? Verse 10, For the mountains will I take up a weeping and wailing, and for the habitations of the wilderness a lamentation, because they are burnt up, so that none can pass through them, neither can men hear the voice of the cattle. Both the fowl of the heavens and the beast are fled, they are gone. And I will make Jerusalem heaps and a den of dragons, and I will make the cities of Judah desolate, without any inhabitant. He's speaking prophetically here, what he's about to do to the nation of Judah. There's going to be a wasteland when the army from the north comes and takes over. Who is this? Who is the wise man that may understand this? And who is he to whom the mouth of the Lord hath spoken, that he may declare it? For what the land perisheth, and is burnt up like a wilderness, that none passes through. And the Lord saith, Because they have forsaken my law, which I set before them, and have not obeyed my voice, neither walked therein, but have walked after the imagination of their heart, after their own heart, and after Balaam, which their fathers taught them. Therefore, thus saith the Lord of the hosts, the God of Israel, Behold, I will feed them, even this people, with wormwood, and give them water of gall to drink. I will scatter them also among the heathen, whom neither they nor their fathers have known, and I will send a sword after them, till I have consumed them. They have forsaken the law of God. They're not following His commandments. We see the same thing today with God's people. People refuse to follow the commandments that God gave us to follow, whether it's something as simple as not telling the truth, or it's as bad as murder or adultery or some of whatever. There are those who refuse to follow the Lord's commandments, and I know those are kind of the extreme, but it was the same way in their day. The Lord commanded them to do certain things, not to do certain things, and they were doing them. The same in our day. We see so many follow after false doctrine and think nothing of it. Those who, even in the Lord's worship, in the Lord's house, even when they meet together, their own worship is blasphemy to the Lord according to His commandments, and yet, for whatever reason, some people think that they can get by with it. They think, well, this is the best I've got for the Lord, so this is how I'm going to worship Him. We see how that worked for Cain, don't we? It didn't work too well for him, but doing what he wanted. God lays out a plan for how He wants us to worship and how we're to present ourselves to Him, not just in the worship service, but also in our everyday lives. And yet, like these people here in Israel, we don't do what He tells us. But these people, it says, but have walked after the imagination of their own heart, and after Balaam. They were following the false god of Baal. That will be an interesting study, and I think I've mentioned it before, to go through and study the false god Baal, because there are different names given for that in the Old Testament. Maybe we'll do that sometime. We'll see. That's kind of ever so often catches my attention, but I've never really sat down and studied it out. And that would be an interesting thing to see. I think there's a lot more there than we really realize. But the Lord's He says He's going to give them wormwood to eat and gall to drink, water of gall to drink. Their food and water is going to be bitter. It's not going to be not going to taste good, and it's because of their sin. And then He says He's going to scatter them among the heathen. Now, if you remember, in the New Testament, in Jesus' day, and into the book of Acts, you see where there were Jews that were coming to Jerusalem for the Passover from all nations under the earth, or on the earth, it says in Acts. In chapter 2, on the day of Pentecost, they were gathered there. Those were the descendants of what he's talking about here. Once they were scattered, there were some, even when the captivity was over with, there were some that never went back. There were some that stayed out in the other nations, in the other parts of the world. And so what you see in Paul's day and in the book of Acts, those people that were scattered throughout Asia and that part of Europe where Paul traveled and the other missionaries traveled, were descendants of the people that had fled, or that had been, I'm sorry, not fled, but had been taken captive out of Jerusalem, and they never went back. Verse 17, Thus saith the Lord of hosts, Consider ye and call for the mourning women, that they may come, and send for cunning women, that they may come, and let them make haste and take up a wailing for us, that our eyes may run down with tears and our lids gush out with waters. One of the practices they had back then was when there was a funeral, there were women that was what they did. They went out and mourned the dead. You see it in Christ, his death. There were women remember the women that were along the way that were weeping and wailing while he was carrying his cross, and even after the other man came and took the cross from him and carried it for him. There was those women that were following along the way, weeping and wailing. That's what that was about. That's what they did. They were, I don't know if you could call them professional mourners or not, but that's kind of what they were. They not necessarily did it for a living, but that was what they did. And the Lord is saying that to call for them because it's time. It's time to mourn. It's time to mourn the death of Jerusalem. For a voice of wailing is heard out of Zion. How are we spoiled? We are greatly confounded because we have forsaken the land, because our dwellings have cast us out. When the question's asked, that's the answer. That's the only answer, according to the Lord, that's the only answer the people could give, is because he says, how are we spoiled? That's not a question. It's an exclamation point at the end. You notice that? How are we spoiled? And the word spoiled here is referring to robbed or taken advantage of, because that's what's going to happen to them. They're going to be robbed and taken advantage of, and not just the things out of their homes, and the things out of the temple, but them themselves physically are going to be taken away. Yet hear the word of the Lord, O ye women, and let your ear receive the word of his mouth, and teach your daughters wailing, and every one her neighbor lamentation. In other words, the Lord wants these women to teach this mourning to the younger generation. For death has come up into our windows, and has entered into our palaces. to cut off the children from without and the young men from the streets. Speak, thus saith the Lord, even the carcasses of men shall fall as dung upon the open field, and as the handful after the harvestman, and none shall gather them. These people are going to die out in the field where they're working. They're going to, as they try to flee, they're going to be killed, and no one's going to bury them. The bodies are just going to lay out there for the animals to take care of. Thus saith the Lord, let not the wise man glory in his wisdom, neither let the mighty man glory in his might. Let not the rich man glory in his riches, but let him that glorieth glory in this, that he understandeth and knoweth me, that I am the Lord, which exercise loving kindness, judgment, and righteousness in the earth. For in these things I delight, saith the Lord. There was a time in Jerusalem and in Judah at this time where you had men of knowledge, men of war. They're soldiers, they're mighty men, and they're rich men, the wealthy people. They had gotten very well known in their day, if you will. They were popular, they were famous for whatever he lists here, whether it was their wisdom or their might or their riches, or all, maybe even some combination of all of it. And we see what it got them. You know, nothing. They lose it all. Behold, the days come, saith the Lord, that I will punish all them which are circumcised with the uncircumcised. Egypt and Judah and Edom and the children of Ammon and Moab and all that are in the utmost corners that dwell in the wilderness, for all these nations are uncircumcised, and all the house of Israel are uncircumcised in the heart. Now, he's in verse 25, the circumcised with the uncircumcised. He's talking about the people of Israel with the uncircumcised, which is the rest of the world, the Gentiles. And then he names these nations, and you notice Judah's mixed in there with them. It's the second one named. Egypt and Judah and Edom, and they're all going to be affected by this. And he ends the chapter with, all the house of Israel are uncircumcised in the heart. In other words, spiritually, they're not circumcised spiritually. If you remember back in our studies with Paul in the New Testament, he talked a lot about the uncircumcised and the circumcised as far as spiritual matters were concerned. If we're saved and we're following the Lord's commandments like we should, we're considered circumcised spiritually. It's the heathen, the ones who don't follow the Lord, that are considered uncircumcised. That's what Paul was trying to get across. Here the Lord says the house of Israel are uncircumcised in the heart. Spiritually, their problems are spiritual. It's not physical, but spiritual. So we'll stop there for tonight. Remember these things. Think on these things. Read ahead. See what God's got for us in the next chapter. And remember, all these things come about. All these things are happening to Judah and to Jerusalem, all because they refused to follow the Lord. And it was all their own doing. It was the Lord, though, that sends the army of the north, the army of Babylon, to overtake them, take them into captivity, and they'll be in captivity for 70 years. And as we get more into this book, we'll see more of that in detail. So we'll stop there for now.